February 13th, 2017, a date forever etched into the consciousness of Delphi, Indiana. The day the lives of Abigail Williams and Liberty German were horrifically stolen. It's a story you've dissected, debated, and analyzed, but today we're peeling back the layers on one of its most controversial figures, Libby's sister, Kelsi German. Over the years, whispers turned to shouts, conspiracy theories swirling online pointed accusing fingers at Kelsi herself, as well as many others. Speculation fueled by seemingly contradictory statements, misremembered details, and mysteries that just refuse to fade, like the infamous sweatshirt confusion and a single strand of Kelsi's hair found clutched in Abby's hand. Did Kelsi have something to hide? Or was she a tragic figure caught between teenage secrets and unspeakable grief? I analyzed 3 distinct appearances by Kelsi German, a Zoom call recounting every detail of that horrific day, an emotionally charged interview inside a moving vehicle with HLN, and, most astonishingly, a podcast by Kelsi herself, where she confronts Doug Carter, superintendent of the Indiana State Police. What I discovered during this analysis is nothing short of shocking, but not for the reasons you might suspect. Because in a plot twist that would make M. Night Shyamalan blush, when Kelsi asked Superintendent Carter about corruption, let's just say the deception indicators weren't swarming around Kelsi. But what does all this mean for the Delphi investigation? What truths still hide beneath the surface? And most importantly, is Kelsi German a tragic victim, unjustly scrutinized, or something else entirely? Today, we're going beyond speculation. We're diving deep into deception detection, revealing exactly who is telling the truth, who is hiding something, what they're hiding, and why. You won't believe what we uncover, so stay tuned. Before we dive deeper into our analysis, I want to equip you with 2 powerful indicators of deception. Mastering these skills will allow you to see through deception, uncovering hidden truths that are sitting there right in plain sight. Indicator number 1 is called literal verbiage, and it means exactly what it says. Here's how it works. When somebody tries to lie about a specific memory or event, their brain often becomes hyper-focused on what they're hiding. Remember, the Broca section is both operating independently and hyper-fixating on that seared-in memory. So they might inadvertently state the exact truth they're desperate to conceal, mixed subtly into their deceptive speech. Now let me give you a couple example phrases and let's see if you can tell which one is deceptive and which one isn't. Statement number 1. I can't believe she said I killed those girls. Statement number 2. I can't believe she accused me of killing those girls. Did you notice the difference? Yeah, obviously. The deceptive person literally says the incriminating phrase, I killed those girls, embedded within their speech, unintentionally confessing through their own words. The truthful statement never directly admits guilt. It's careful, articulate, and devoid of hidden admissions. This is not accidental. When your brain is hyper-focused on, I killed those girls, it's almost impossible to not let those words come out somewhere in your speech. That's why I look so intently for those inadvertent confessions. Let's move on to our second critical indicator, which involves repetition, specifically repeating words. This repetition I call sensitivity, a signal of internal stress and cognitive overload. For example, repeating filler words like and reveals elevated stress and anxiety levels. But repeating pronouns is even more telling. Let me give you another 2 examples here. First, I went to the store and then I left. That indicates high sensitivity. I know, I'm not letting you guess on this one. But the next example is an example of all-out complete deception. The second example is I was at the store. That is deception. When somebody repeats a pronoun twice, that's high sensitivity. It can be deception, but it can be a lot of other information that person is trying to process. What happens to a truthful person is they shut down that process after the second I. Once they realize that they've started talking and there's more information that they need to analyze before they can tell you the truthful end of that sentence, they'll stop talking so that they can think. When a deceptive person is trying to fabricate the end of their sentence, they don't want that pause or that hesitation in there. So they feel this internal need to keep talking. So you'll see I, and then it'll run into the fabrication. But if you end up seeing more than 3 I's, oh man, that's painful. In fact, The 3-eye indicator is so important. It's so telling that I actually used it on my favorite coffee mug right here, because there's just no way around it. When somebody's repeating I, it's deception. It's easy to spot in real time. You don't have to go back and analyze it. And it tells you exactly what's happening. Understanding these indicators transforms you from a passive listener into an active analyst. Now, armed with this knowledge, you're ready to deeply understand our upcoming analysis. So keep these indicators in mind, because we're about to apply them directly to Kelsi German's interviews and reveal truths that you never saw coming. As always, remember that the questions are in red and the answers may leave you shocked and confused. Which reminds me, if you have questions about my techniques, just leave them in the comments and I'll work on getting those answered. Maybe on Amy's show, Case by Case, if she's up for it. I haven't run this past her yet, but we'll see. I think she'll probably be good with it. But if not, I'm just going to pretend like I didn't say this here. All right, let's dive right in. A quick note. This episode's delivery will feel a little different than usual. My full analysis that you're used to, every observation, every linguistic breakdown, is still completely intact. You'll see it all on the screen in real time. But this time, I'll be telling the story in a more conversational and narrative-driven way. It's still me, just a narrative through a little different lens. Let me know in the comments, does this message still land clear or does it feel diluted? I'm open, as always, to your feedback. Now, let's jump right in with this introduction from Kelsi herself.
I am Kelsi German. I am Liberty German's older sister. At the time the girls were murdered, I was 17 years old and I am now 19. Libby was more of an outgoing person. She loved children, she loved adults, she just loved people. That's how she was raised, that's how she became the amazing woman that she was turning into.
Kelsi didn't over-introduce herself here. She kept it simple. I am Kelsi German. I am Liberty German's older sister. She was 17 when it happened, and she's 19 now. There's a calm authority in that statement, one that invites us to listen, not just because of who she is, but because of who she was when this all began. When she talked about Libby, the words were warm and loving. Libby was more of an outgoing person. She loved children, she loved adults, she loved people. That's a picture of someone who was open-hearted, gentle, and alive. But then, one sentence shifted everything. That's how she became the amazing woman that she was turning into. That word, woman, doesn't just slip out. It lands, and it lands hard. Calling a 14-year-old a woman comes with weight. It crosses a line linguistically and emotionally. We say girl when we mean safe, innocent, young, lady when we want to show polite distance, but woman, that's different. That carries a layer of sexual maturity. So why that word? It seems accidental, like it came from somewhere deeper, somewhere that already knew Libby was stepping into a different space. Maybe one Kelsi had sensed, but couldn't stop. If Libby was talking to Anthony's shots, if there was some kind of relationship forming there, however one-sided or manipulative, then maybe this wasn't a slip at all. Maybe it was Kelsi telling us, without realizing she was telling us, that Libby had already stepped out of childhood. And that matters. That's not just memory, it's framing. That one word opens up a different way of seeing everything that came after. When Kelsi spoke about Abby, the tone changed. It got grounded. She said Abby was a saxophone player. She loved volleyball. She spent a lot of time with her family. She loved her family and her cat. She was a very outdoorsy kind of person. It was direct, clear, no dressing up or reaching for meaning. It was just the truth. And in its simplicity, it felt real. That's who Abby was, and Kelsi told us that without needing to make it more than it was.
So the night before, they were actually painting in their room after having a girls' night. We all kind of hung out downstairs. We were watching movies with some of my friends, and it was just a really good night. And that's kind of how it always was when Abby was over.
She eased into it gently. So the night before, they were actually painting in their room after having a girls' night. That image is soft, almost too soft. Two girls painting after a night together. It's a lovely image, but the word so tells us something's coming. That's a bridge word, the kind you use when you're about to walk someone around something hard. And she does. She doesn't talk about the day of the murder. She steps backwards in time to the night before. When someone begins a story on their own, they start it where it started. And in Kelsi's mind, this story begins here, with the sleepover. But when she says, after having a girls' night, suddenly Something doesn't quite fit. There's a gap in time there. Something happened between that girls' night and the painting, and we don't hear about it. That silence, it's not just an oversight, it's a signal. But when she fills in the rest, it gets even murkier. We all kind of hung out downstairs. We were watching movies with some of my friends, and it was just a really good night. Every phrase here has a crack in it. Kind of hung out, not really together. With some of my friends. With indicates conflict. Just a really good night. It wasn't just, and it wasn't really good. Then she says, that's kind of how it always was when Abby was over. Another kind of, another quiet fracture. That wasn't how it always was, but was Abby causing some strain this evening, something that was off, even if no one said it? Now, we do know from Kegan Kline that this was the same night Libby was messaging with the Anthony Shots profile. Explicit messages happening in real time. Kegan Kline also contacted another girl who was at that sleepover. Was that Abby? Was Abby the one pushing to meet with Anthony Shots? Or did Abby disapprove of the online relationship altogether? Regardless, let's be honest, Kelsi had to have known something was going on. Maybe not the full picture, but girls at a sleepover don't have a lot of secrets from each other, especially when the secret involves more than one of them. The night wasn't just innocent. It wasn't just about movies and painting. The description of painting wasn't just a way to pass time. It was a retreat, a place to hide. The act of painting sounds innocent, but it's concealing a canvas of explicit pictures and text messages racing back and forth, the type of actions that betray innocence, that lead one into womanhood. Let's now listen to this next clip. As the clip begins, listen closely, not just to what Kelsi says, but how she says it.
So that day, it was kind of a last minute idea for the girls to go to the High Bridge. A High Bridge is a part of our trail system that a lot of people go and they spend time there. That's where we would go to take pictures. We would go there just to see the beautiful scenery that's around. That day, they had the day off and they knew that they wanted to do something, but they didn't know what, whether it was stay home or go with me somewhere. They didn't know.
Kelsi's rhythm shift at a critical point, right when she calls the trip to the bridge kind of a last-minute idea. Her voice slows, not by accident, but as a signal. It's a hesitation that says more than the words themselves. That pause, it's the kind people use when they're trying to choose each word with care, when the truth is too close for comfort. And look at that phrasing, kind of, not it was, not we decided, just kind of. That's the language of distance, a way to retreat from the commitment of a truthful statement. If it had really been spontaneous, there'd be no reason to hedge. But she does, and that tells us something. This wasn't just a casual decision. She's backing away from the reality, but why? Because the truth complicates things. Was the trip really last minute, or had it been quietly planned ahead of time? Maybe even the night before during the sleepover, when we consider what we now know, that Libby was messaging with Anthony Shots' profile, and that another girl at the sleepover was also contacted by Kegan Kline. The idea of a prearranged meeting stops sounding like a stretch, and it starts sounding like the missing piece. Kelsi's language, vague and cautious, suggests a deeper awareness than what she's willing to acknowledge out loud. Her uncertainty isn't about forgetting, it's about protecting. And when she talks about her own reaction to the girls leaving that day, she says she wanted them to stay home. It's a small sentence, but the way she says it stands out. There's weight in it, not just hindsight, regret, a warning. Then she adds, they could have just gone with me. But here's where it slips. Kelsi had to work that day, so going with her wasn't actually an option. Why even suggest it? Because she's grasping at smoke, trying to rewrite the moment in a way that lets her hold on to something that now feels out of reach. That kind of contradiction, it's the language of someone who's improvising, reaching for something that sounds safe, but not necessarily something that's true. Even the word with carries subtle tension. It starts to sound like she's talking about people who were already emotionally distant, already moving in a direction she couldn't stop. And when you line it all up, her careful tone, her soft qualifiers, the repetition of the word they, it forms a clear pattern. This wasn't just a spontaneous trip. It was a plan Kelsi likely knew about, maybe not in full, maybe not in detail, but enough to make her uncomfortable. So what's the goal behind all the vagueness? To shield something or someone, because if the trip to the bridge wasn't random, if it was arranged through Anthony's shots, and if Kelsi knew or even suspected that, then the narrative shifts. The weight of it changes. And what we hear now isn't a timeline, it's a defense, a quiet attempt to contain what's too painful to face directly.
So that morning, they actually helped my grandma with some business stuff, and they had painted a little bit. And my dad had made them breakfast that morning. And while I was getting ready, Libby came upstairs and asked me what I was doing that day. And when I told her I had to work and I was going to Chase's house, I told her I couldn't go with her, but she wanted me to take her. And so I told her no, not that day, maybe another day. A little while later, I had told her that I would take her if she could get a ride home. And Grandma said yes. So she was asking Grandma and she was asking my dad, and they had both said it was okay and that my dad would pick her up later.
Kelsi starts the next part with a string of simple, harmless memories. So that morning, they actually helped my grandma with some business stuff, and they painted a little bit, and my dad had made them breakfast. Sounds like any other morning, but again, that first word, so, matters. It's a buffer, a way to ease into something that she's not ready to say. These aren't just details, they're narrative insulation, little layers of normalcy meant to soften and delay what's coming. Because what's coming is the moment Libby asked to go to the bridge. While I was getting ready, Libby came upstairs and asked me what I was doing that day. Libby wanted Kelsi to take her, and Kelsi said no. The phrasing, I told her I couldn't go with her, carries more than just information. It carries her truth, her protective nature, her defense. She's not just recalling, she's justifying. And when people start explaining decisions before they're questioned, it usually means they feel that way already. Why defend it? Because Kelsi probably knew something wasn't right. That this wasn't just two girls looking for a walk in the woods. Her no came from somewhere deeper. It wasn't scheduling, it was discomfort. She even uses the word told again and again. That's a power word. She wanted to make it clear. She made a decision, she said no, she tried. But the story keeps moving, and the pressure keeps mounting. A little while later, I had told her that I would take her if she could get a ride home. That phrase, a little while later, quietly covers another gap in the story, a conversation not fully shared. It's likely that Libby pushed back, maybe with charm, maybe with pressure. Either way, Kelsi bent. She didn't want to, so she gave a condition, find your own way home, a condition she thought couldn't be met. But Libby didn't stop there. She went to Grandma, she went to Dad, and they said yes. Here Kelsi changes her verbs. No more told, now it's said. That's not just language, it's conflict. It tells us she felt sidelined, like she lost control, and maybe like they didn't understand what she was trying to prevent. Underneath the details is structure. Kelsi's instinct to say no, Libby's push to compromise, Kelsi's barriers to relieve the pressure of looking like a bad sister, a final override from people who didn't see what Kelsi saw, and the way she tells it, it's careful, controlled, not because she's hiding something big, but because she's holding on to what little she did try to do. She wants us to know she tried.
And so that's kind of what led up to her going, was the fact that they wanted to do something on their day off. They just wanted to do something fun. They wanted to get out of the house. They didn't want to be there all stuck in the house on the day off of school. It was a nice day. Another thing I remember was eating breakfast with her that morning. My dad had made banana pancakes, and we sat there and we ate, and that was our last meal together, and I'll never forget that.
And so that's kind of what led up to her going. Two softeners, and so and kind of, both designed to hold back the full emotional punch. Together they say, I'm going to tell you, but only some of it. She describes the girls wanting to do something, have fun, get out of the house, not be stuck inside, 4 different ways to say the same thing. But when someone repeats themselves like that, it's not just about emphasis, it's about stress. The repetition doesn't add clarity. It foreshadows what's coming. Because deep down, this wasn't just a casual outing, and Kelsi probably knew that. Anthony's shots wasn't a footnote, he was the catalyst. But saying that out loud would break everything. So instead, we get a soft phrasing, round edges, emotional language without these sharp corners of truth. And then out of nowhere, she says, "Another thing I remember was eating breakfast with her that morning." That's not filler. That's grief. Banana pancakes. A quiet moment. The ordinary becomes sacred. But even here, listen to how she puts it. I ate breakfast with her. Not we ate pancakes together. That little shift with her adds space. A lingering conversation that generated conflict. Maybe a warning from Kelsi that a meeting with a stranger from the internet might not be a good idea. A conversation that clearly wasn't received well. And then comes the sentence that stops everything. That was our last meal together, and I'll never forget that. This isn't storytelling anymore. It's emotional weight. It's memory. It's the moment everything changed. It's the moment everything stopped being abstract and became real. She's not covering anymore. She's remembering and regretting. The sentence begins with "so," a word easily overlooked but crucial in high-stakes language. It's a signal of internal sensitivity, a defense mechanism in speech that smooths the transition into a psychologically difficult moment. What follows isn't just memory. It's a reconstruction, filtered through guilt, emotional tension, and narrative control.
So that day, I dropped the girls off at around 1:35. I watched Libby walk away after telling her I loved her. She said it back, and I made sure they both had sweatshirts. So they continued to walk, and I drove away. After I dropped them off, I called Chase and told him that I was on my way.
Kelsi continues, I watched Libby walk away after telling her I loved her. On the surface, it's tender, but zoom in on the phrase "after telling her." That small word "after" creates yet another gap. It subtly obscures a moment between speaking and watching, a moment that likely held something more. Not just affection, but a warning. It's probable that Kelsi tried one last time to dissuade Libby from going to meet Anthony's shots. The omission is structural, not accidental. It conceals a final attempt and a final rejection. She said it back, a phrase meant to reassure, but it doesn't. The verb said is emotionally neutral or even cold. It's not told, which signals emotional confidence. It reads less like a heartfelt moment and more like Kelsi trying to convince herself, after the fact, that there was still peace between them. It's possible Libby said it sarcastically, dismissively, or out of obligation. Words spoken but not felt. That detail would haunt a sister forever. Then the sentence heard round the world. I made sure they both had sweatshirts. This is one of the few clean lines in her narrative. Direct, specific, and yes, truthful. And yet, even here, there's something quietly revealing. She doesn't say, I gave them sweatshirts. Or, they took mine. She says she made sure they had them. It's protective, mothering, but it's also a window into the moment, because it suggests that the sweatshirts weren't Kelsi's greatest concern at that moment. She was focused on logistics, yes, but likely in the middle of a far more heated and urgent discussion. She may have offered hers, they may have even agreed to take hers, and in the tension of that exchange, she may not have realized that they actually took their own sweatshirts. Why is that so important? Because it points to conflict, not coordination. Kelsi's priority wasn't just the weather. The conflict came from a far deeper fear, where they were going and why. Remember Kelsi's language. Libby was becoming a woman. Kelsi's fear here was likely not of death itself, but rather, how shall I put this, bringing forth new life. Sometimes the worst case is so inconceivable that it's not even the greatest consideration in that moment. To those of you who saw deception here, who assumed malicious intent, know that deception itself is not malicious. Malintent is malicious. Deception is not representing reality as it was. Sometimes people use deception to hide nefarious intent, but sometimes it's simply to preserve a veil of innocence that maybe wasn't really there, not out of hate, but out of love. So they continued to walk and I drove away. This sentence on its own is devastating. The verb continued is passive, resigned. It shows that she was already feeling helpless. In her mind, Kelsi had tried to change Libby's path, but changing someone else's path is not a child's game. Without the force of will that comes from age and experience, Kelsi was outside of her depth here. So she watched, hoping they might change their minds and turn back. But of course they didn't. The act of driving away was not just physical, it was symbolic. It was the moment Kelsi abdicated control and placed her trust in the belief that the worst would never actually happen. That same illusion that most people live by their whole lives, until one day, they no longer can. After I dropped them off, I called Chase and told him I was on my way. Here, Abby and Libby are no longer in Kelsi's presence, and we return to emotional safety. The relationship with Chase is routine, familiar, even exciting. Kelsi uses told again, which carries positive emotional connotation. Unlike the emotionally neutral said used earlier when describing Libby, this contrast is telling. Kelsi is relaxed here, comfortable. It marks a psychological boundary between before the trauma and after, between the moment she tried to stop something hypothetical and the moment she succumbed to the pressure and gave up, thinking, as anyone would, surely everything will be fine. But we get to live in Kelsi's future, not her present. As we know, everything would not be fine. And now every word she speaks about that day carries two weights, the one she's willing to say and the one she's trying not to. Now let's continue.
Chase left a little bit before I did. He had to work at 4 and I was working at 4:30. So there was a little bit of a gap. And so I had a little time to sit down and watch a movie with his dad and hang out until it was my turn. Around 4:12, I got a couple calls from my grandma.
At first glance, this is a mundane memory. Two young people heading to work, killing time. But let's look deeper. Point 1. Chase left a little bit before I did. The word left usually means the person is running late, and in this case, when going to work, that probably is the case. Now, here's where it gets interesting. She says before, but she completely skips what happened before Chase left. That's a narrative gap. In deception detection, omission is often more telling and more interesting than what's included. What were they doing? And why doesn't she want to explain what they were doing? Next, we see what's called an alibi frame. She's heavily time-stamping events, but the times are not related to the crime. Chase left at 4. I worked at 4:30. Grandma called at 4:12, but none of these directly overlap with the time of the incident. Remember, the murders began at about 3:07. 3:15, something like that. Time stamping is subconscious and based around what's weighing on your mind in that moment. In this case, the murders are not yet known to Kelsi, and the biggest problem she is facing is getting caught with her boyfriend. Now, if you're thinking that maybe the actual murders happened around the time that she's stamping, that's not the way that people stamp. People stamp based around when the incident began, when it ended, and then a substantial impact point in the middle. For Kelsi, that is clearly from when Chase was supposed to leave until she was supposed to leave, and then when her grandma called at that point in the middle. So if the timestamps were in regard to the murder, there would be a stamp that was around that 3:07 time.
I didn't hear my phone go off the first time, so the second time it went off, I knew something must have been wrong because my grandma never calls multiple times unless she really needs something, especially if she knows that I have to go to work that day. So I picked up my phone and I called my grandma back. And the first thing she said was, "Have you heard from Libby?"
Now, we also have so, which is over-explaining at the time of the, let's just call it fooling around for now. Moving on. At a glance, this sounds like standard recollection, a missed call, a callback, and rising concern. But when deconstructed through the lens of deception analysis, the language unravels into something more complex, a carefully managed memory, shaped as much by what's said as by what's strategically withheld. First, I didn't hear my phone go off the first time. This is a negative statement, and in verbal forensics, that's a red flag. Negation doesn't just convey absence, it's a defensive frame, primed not to recount truth, but to preempt guilt. More importantly, it's followed by an explanatory clause. So the second time it went off, I knew something must have been wrong. This negative plus an explanatory phrase pattern is a classic linguistic marker of deception. It suggests that the speaker isn't simply recalling, they're justifying. Kelsi almost certainly did register the first call. She likely chose not to answer, possibly due to fooling around with Chase. But she can't say that directly, so the structure compensates. Denial, then rationalization. Second, we see logical inconsistency. The second time, how would she know it was the second time unless the first time made some sort of impression on her? If she truly didn't hear the phone the first time, there would be no basis for recognizing the second call as anything unusual. The awareness of the second call being significant, paired with the claim of not hearing the first, reveals a structural contradiction. It's not just flawed logic, it's the mind subconsciously revealing that the first call did register even if her mind was elsewhere. So I picked up my phone. Another "so" appears here. Once again, it's an explanatory statement, a linguistic signal of discomfort or sensitivity. Instead of simply saying, "I called her back," Kelsi feels the need to explain why. This over-justification points to emotional weight. She's not just recounting, she's mitigating the tension of that moment. The first thing she said was, "Have you heard from Libby?" Here, we get the clearest tonal shift. The word "said" as opposed to "told" has subtle negative connotations. Where "told" conveys structure and clarity, "said" is neutral, often carrying the undertone of emotional dissonance or discomfort. It reflects the mood of the conversation. This wasn't a warm, composed check-in. It was a cold opening into dread. This isn't just a story of missed calls and concerned relatives. It's the psychological outline of a turning point, the exact moment when Kelsi's world began to tip. Her language betrays what her memory tries to hide. She likely heard or noticed the first call. She chose not to answer, caught in a moment of personal conflict. The second call forced her into reality, and she scrambled to reframe her decision as benign. Her grandmother's opening question was a line drawn in the sand. From that moment on, there would be no more delay, no more avoiding what was coming. Kelsi's emotional calculus shifted in real time. Love, loyalty, and fear colliding. So let's continue.
And that was the hardest moment, I think, of that particular day. After we heard, I called my work and told them I was going to help search for my sister. I got in my car and drove to High Bridge. At the moment, I called my grandma and told her I was on my way. I could hear the scaredness in her voice, the amount of hurt that she was feeling just knowing that something was wrong.
The day she got the news was, in her words, the hardest moment. Or at least that's how she framed it. But even as she said it, she qualified the statement, "I think." That subtle emotional distancing stands out. People rarely insert emotion where they're recalling real trauma. They feel it, they relive it, but they discuss it after the incident, not in mid-story. That kind of emotional packaging often signals performance, not memory. Still, there may have been genuine conflict, especially if she'd been struggling with the decision to let Libby and Abby go to the bridge in the first place. Real guilt and selective honesty often coexist. She described what happened next, calling her workplace, deciding to join the search, and getting in her car to drive to High Bridge. On the way, she phoned her grandmother, choosing to emphasize the scaredness in her grandmother's voice. Again, it was a curiously emotional note, as if she needed the listener to believe what she was feeling. But underneath the surface of that account, something was missing, specifically the time after they heard the news. There's a gap, an absence where key events should be. That missing block becomes even more suspicious when you realize it's tied to the word "we." She doesn't say "I heard," she says "we heard." But her boyfriend Chase was supposed to be at work at that time. Also, remember, he left late and in a hurry. Remember, he left, not right as he was supposed to, as portrayed. Pronouns are objective, and they'll betray you. That slip exposes something. Chase wasn't at work. They were together doing something that had to be hidden. And whatever that was, it couldn't withstand scrutiny. Her language gives away more, though. She uses the word "told" twice, once for calling her work, once for speaking to her grandmother. Told carries a sense of decisiveness and authority. It's the confident version of "said," which is softer and more uncertain. The choice of "told" suggests that, in that moment, she wasn't overcome with worry. That tells us something crucial. She didn't believe Abby was in real danger. Not yet. If she still thought Abby was alive at that point, it's also hard to believe she was involved in her death. The story she tells, and the way she tells it, is stitched with subtle fractures, gaps in time, misaligned pronouns, emotion where there should be memory, certainty where there should be fear. All of it forms a pattern, not of guilt necessarily, but of concealment. Something was happening behind the scenes that wasn't about murder, but rather the hidden we. She said it started to hit her.
And that's kind of when I knew, like, there's something happening. Like, I don't know where the girls are. I don't know where Libby is. I haven't heard from her. I was confused. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know what to say to my family.
And that's kind of when I knew, like, there's something happening. But even in that moment of supposed realization, the language faltered. Words like kind of and like crept in. Hedging terms. They weren't casual speech patterns, they were subtle reductions of commitment. This wasn't when she knew. It was when she wanted others to believe she started to worry. The truth is, Kelsi likely didn't suspect anything terrible had happened yet. Beneath the surface of her statement is a quieter, more plausible story. One where she thought Libby was off with Anthony's shots, maybe sneaking away to make out under the bridge, doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing, but not something life-threatening. Kelsi's concern at this point was likely not fear for Libby's safety, it was embarrassment and the fear of getting caught helping her sister to establish this secret rendezvous. Let's continue with the story. She described herself as confused, unsure. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know what to say to my family. A spiral of negative statements, but buried in that last line is something more, a tacit admission. I didn't know what to say to my family. Doesn't just express helplessness. It suggests withheld truth. Kelsi likely knew that Libby had gone to meet someone, Anthony Schatz, and she hadn't told anyone. She wasn't necessarily trying to cover up a crime at that point. She probably didn't think anything bad had happened. More likely, she was trying to avoid getting Libby in trouble and maybe avoid getting herself in some trouble too, for facilitating the meetup or at least turning a blind eye to it. So she stood there, caught between the story she was telling and the truth she was withholding, not because she was guilty of something worse, but because she didn't yet understand the gravity of what was unfolding. Let's move along.
After I had told my grandma I was on my way, I arrived at the bridge. It was probably around 4:30, I'm assuming, based on when I got the phone call. We were going to go to the trails and look and see if we could find the girls ourselves. Like, our main thought was they must have fallen, dropped a phone. Maybe they got lost in the woods. They wandered off a little too far and couldn't find their way back. So at that time, me and my uncle crossed the bridge. We got down to the private drive and we were walking around, yelling their names, trying to find out where they might be, hoping that if they had gotten hurt, they would just yell back and say, hey, we're over here, can you help us? At that point, we hadn't heard anything, so we headed back.
She said that after telling her grandmother she was on the way, she arrived at the bridge, probably around 4:30 p.m., tying the statement loosely to the timing of a phone call. But the word after was quietly flagging another gap. That moment between telling her grandmother and arriving likely involved a personal debate, whether or not to reveal the real reason Libby had gone out that day, whether to admit that she knew Libby was meeting someone named Anthony Schatz, weighing the gravity of the situation, which she deemed as a sister in the throes of romance, to the consequences of a potential admission to the withheld information that an unknown person from the internet was potentially involved. Once she described arriving, her tone shifted. The sequence of events that followed was grounded, anchored in tangible memory. She and her uncle crossed the bridge, went down to the private drive, called out the girls' names. They imagined plausible scenarios. The girls had fallen, dropped a phone, wandered too far. But then the narrative drifted again. At that point, she said, we hadn't heard anything, so we headed back. On the surface, it sounds logical, but that phrasing, at that point, is another gap, a curtain pulled over an undefined stretch of time. Something happened between searching and turning back, something important. And then there's the structure of the sentence itself. A negative statement, we hadn't heard anything, followed immediately by an explanation, so we headed back. That pairing, negation followed by rationale, is a classic marker of concealed information. Taken together, these linguistic patterns suggest a quiet pivot in the story. The physical search may have been real, but the decision to turn back wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. The omission points to an unseen event, something they encountered, realized, or decided, not explained to us, but powerful enough to change their course of action. Was it at that point that Kelsi may have mentioned something about there being another person involved, Anthony Schatz? That's just me speculating, but there is definitely missing time there. Whatever it was, it pushed them away from the woods and towards their next move, calling the police. So what happened? I don't know, but let's move on.
We decided that it was time that we got a hold of the police. It was starting to get dark. We knew that they needed help. Every possible situation was going through our brains, and we never thought we would end up with the outcome we did. We got a hold of the police. Finally, my grandparents went to the police station.
13. She said they decided it was time to contact the police. It was starting to get dark, she explained. The missing time was the missing search. As the darkness would inevitably end the search, the word never replaces a more honest didn't, which wouldn't have allowed room for doubt or fear. Never is absolute, and absolutes are rarely truthful. It's a way to deny that the possibility of death had even crossed their minds. But of course, that's hard to believe. By this point, the girls were truly missing. It wasn't just a delay or running off with a boy. If Kelsi was being honest with herself, she had almost certainly started to fear the worst, and it's possible that her uncle might have also at this point. Let's continue with the story. 14.
Knowing the area, I knew areas that the girls would have went if they were going there willingly. So going around those areas, I was able to help them go to spots that I knew Libby would have been if she wanted.
She explained that, knowing the area, she had a sense of where the girls might have gone, if they were going there willingly. It seems like a casual qualifier, but that one word, willingly, is a fracture in the timeline. It's not the kind of thought you have in the moment, unless something darker is already on your mind. That's not how people think during a simple search. That's how people think when they're already aware there was another person involved. By inserting that word, Kelsi unwittingly revealed a split in her awareness. She wasn't just looking for the girls, she was already calculating the possibility that Libby hadn't gone there by choice. But she doesn't say it directly. She uses the conditional to keep it at arm's length, making it seem like she was still holding on to hope, when in truth, the thought of coercion had already entered her mind. Then she mentioned the places she guided the others to search. Places where she knew Libby would have been if she wanted to be there. What she's describing, carefully and without naming it, are the kinds of spots teenagers sneak off to. Quiet, hidden, semi-private, make-out points. That detail suggests Kelsi had reason to believe Libby had arranged to meet someone like Anthony Schatz. At that stage, Kelsi likely still thought this was a situation she could manage. Maybe Libby was just being reckless. Maybe she was hiding with a boy. But beneath that possibility was a deeper one she couldn't bring herself to say aloud yet, that Libby hadn't gone willingly, and that something was already terribly wrong. The language dances around that fear, avoiding it with conditionals and vague geography, but it's there in what she says, and more clearly in what she tries not to. And so, we move on.
To be there. Soon after that, search parties started to form of people in the community. People were coming from all over to help us. They were coming from different cities. They were from our community. There were people going out there from other states, I believe. There were just people from all over there searching. Later on that evening, I believe around midnight, the search was called off for whatever reason. They said it was because of the safety. The terrain was really rough and rugged, and they just didn't want people to get hurt. They didn't want to have to put their resources into helping other people when we needed to find the girls. That was really defeating, knowing that the search was called off. I went home to try to sleep, and I didn't get in.
15. The way she describes the formation of the search party is also telling. Started to form, not formed. There's a subtle stall there, a suggestion that the momentum never quite reached its full potential. Then, later on that evening, she jumps ahead, another time gap. That bridge between effort and outcome is left unexplored, and in that space lies the real tension, the growing friction between Kelsi and the authorities. Around midnight, she says the search was called off. For whatever reason, it's a phrase loaded with disbelief. She doesn't accept the explanation she was given. The official line was about safety. The terrain was too rugged, the risk too high. But the way she recounts it, the rationale feels hollow. She recites it with detachment, with a string of negative and explanatory statements that betray her real belief, that the police weren't doing their best. Maybe that she wasn't actually telling them the whole truth.